the scribe. I want to talk about the wonderful role or posture of the scribe, how this relates to intellectual property and Western mind. Every role is posture. There's the posture of the student and of the teacher. There are the different postures of the body. They're roles. We move into them and hopefully don't hang on to them when we move out of them. Like Patanjali says, if the mind isn't quiet, we identify with the thoughts. The scribe is a posture and a role that is unique in yoga, or in these traditions that yoga comes from. And it's very treasured and wonderful. The archetypical scribe is Ganesha, the Ekadanta, who in his work as a transcriptionist had to break off a tusk, Eka Danta, and use that as a stylus in order to maintain the continuity of the transcription of a story that was being told to him. So there's a devotionality in it, a total commitment to passing something on. This is happening, or this archetype's developed in a context in which texts are placed on banana leaves or palm leaves, and as those leaves decay, then picked up and retranscribed once again. Something about this that is not separate from archiving as we now know it. The scribe has to be precise, has to be devoted to the work. We've started bringing the role of scribe into the shala around the foundations courses. And I've really noticed like the sweetness in that. And each person who's acted as a scribe so far, Eva and Kristen and Amy, has noted the effect on the mind of serving that role, the mediator between the person who's channeling something and anyone else who's receiving it. This also highlights a really extremely esoteric aspect of the scribe's role, which is that in the cultural context, the person who is the speaker is said to be hearing from beyond them. It's called shruti. You're listening and you're hearing. There's a lineage of listening that the speaker who is being transcribed is participating in, and then including someone through this act of speaking and listening. That person is, like in the modern contexts, there are no rishis, but in the cultural context, that person is called a rishi or a saint or a mystic, the one who hears. And this is something that I came to understand very, very slowly, the way that the notion of the rishi and the scribe is infused into the knowledge system of yoga. Very early in many people's encounters, and in mine, with the practice, I heard of the legend that the Ashtanga asanas were written down on banana leaves that Krishnamacharya and Pattabhi Jois found in the Calcutta library. And in a way that I found dismissive and infuriating. The story goes that Pattabhi Jois would always tell people when asked for verification of this knowledge, "Let me see the text." He would say it was eaten by ants. What this does is it creates a listening lineage with no textual referent, which is kind of the point. The text is always just a commodity. It's just an object. And the living knowledge is passed through listening. And yet still we have the importance of the text in this tradition, but it's understood to be always on the edge of decaying and being eaten by ants. It's organic material. Organic material, same as we are, same as our actual minds. Well, that's up to debate, whether the mind is an organic substance or not in this tradition. It's an important question. The text, Narasimhan said to me when I first arrived, the moment you write something down, something is lost. And that something is the listening, the something is the aliveness. And yet it's got to be done. Those banana leaves are there, the scribe is there to put it down faithfully. But that story that the Ashtanga asanas were recovered, were found, and then brought back into circulation. As I've understood the non-Western conditioned mind, I've understood the plausibility of this. This is how knowledge is found and recovered. If the listening lineage breaks, maybe there's the capacity to find remnants of it in archives. Again, scribe is very important. If outside of Western mind, you want to place your work in a live, listening lineage, then it's something, the knowledge that you're sharing is something that you heard. There is no possibility that knowledge you invented is of any value whatsoever. The regime of intellectual property is non-existent in this mentality, but it's also a way of marking knowledge as not heard, not from a source that is clear-minded and possibly even beyond this world. This whole idea of the Vedic tradition is that there were super clear-minded rishis who did not filter their hearing through their samskaras, through their imprinting, like all of us do. We don't actually know how to listen because our minds are, to some degree, limited and cloudy from our samskaras, from our patterned existence. And therefore, the clarification of the mind, the stilling and then understanding of nature of consciousness itself is what allows us to receive actual knowledge. And a rishi, a mystic seer, is one who has done that work to the utmost, and thus when they hear from beyond this world, they hear clearly. Having a scribe comes into this because hopefully a scribe, even if their mind is conditioned or limited, could write down precisely that which the rishi has heard. And in all of this, saying, I invented this knowledge. This was my idea. This is my property. One, the whole idea is that the knowledge is a thing. It's a commodity. That's a kind of distortion. It's a kind of almost obscenity to think of knowledge as a thing. Knowledge is a relationship. It's a tradition. It's something alive. And claiming it to be mine is a way of saying, this is absolutely not clearly heard content that comes from a higher place than my limited mind. So in this context, that when we think about the source, the mystical source of our own methods, which I do believe is somewhat invented and somewhat heard from beyond the stars in a mystical sense, the idea that one would put one's name or imprint on it and say it's mine, which to some degree I do think that Krishnamacharya and Pattabhi Jois really put a lot of these things together, is an aspect of the knowledge system that you would put to the background while noticing that this is part of a stream of living knowledge. And this is why it's always said in the Indian context, I never changed anything that my guru taught me, even though all of the details are being changed and updated and brought into a practical application as time goes on. There's an essence, there's a spirit of the law and a letter of the law. Shruti and smriti, that's a different conversation, that allows us to connect with the timeless, changeless nature of the knowledge system and have this understanding that I have not changed anything from that which I've received. So all of this is the nature of listening lineage of Shruti. And in the midst of this, the scribe is a mediator who creates archives and records, but also serves a role of clarification. And looking to the role of the student and a teacher, I wanted to share a little bit of my own experience of being the scribe. When I came into a relationship with Dominic, I had this incredible and new experience of having someone really be able to teach me on the level of my thinking and teach me on the level of my energy and correct my wrong knowledge and correct my misconceptions, very often in weird and performative and complicated ways where, for example, he cottoned on to the fact that I am obsessed with history and obsessed with the nostalgia of my own forebears. And so I would ask him all the time about the old days and want to know all of the information and all of the stories. And at one point, he's just stopped. And he was like, Angela, these are the good old days. These right here. This is yoga. Yoga is now. In a really dramatic way that was hard for anybody at the coffee shop to understand, but that cut into my nostalgia cycles at the root. That's how he worked with me, was in disruptive ways, like almost socially disruptive. And so much so that in transcribing them into my journals, I'd have to look deeply into what he was saying and doing in that act of transcription and give an order to the teachings. And this is something that his partner has said to me several times, which is she perceives and he senses a value in our relationship for him in that I give order to his expressions. And the order that I give comes from seeing into the sort of meta teaching for everything that he does and assembling it into a sensible structure that then I can pass on to you. So there's very much a transcription, a scribe that's at work inside of me in that relationship. And the same is absolutely true of Shiraji. Looking back at my notes from conference, which you're not allowed to take notes in conference, although it turns out there was one person who wrote down the conferences. That's a topic for a different day. In my notes, there's fragments. I would, as soon as conference ended, very often get down the fragments, hold a few of these little turns of phrase in my mind. And there's also an ordering function in my notes that, starting in 2009, is the birth of this awareness of my own Western mind, that mind that wants to know exactly where the asana sequence came from, that demands the truth of where is the text, or did it even exist, that doesn't understand this mythical listening lineage that I'm being placed in, and is starting to understand from Shirachi's transmission, the way he's just telling me random stories about playing cricket in the yard and riding his scooter up the hill. There's like some way that the stories are carrying a secret, unwritten story about what is the nature of learning in this context. He used to say a lot at the beginning, I want you to be in my neighborhood. I just want you to be here. I want you to spend time here. That was, this whole idea of going for pilgrimage, just being in his neighborhood, absorbing something even behind words, behind reason. And still in my very faulty acts as a scribe of those conferences, there's some meta learning that's happening. And the Western mind, the scholarly mind that wants to know what is this thing that I've discovered, is starting to relax, recognizing that I haven't discovered anything. It's always been here, it always will be. And the efforts to rationalize it are a complete distraction from participating therein. There's one downstream consequence of really starting to soak in to a listening lineage. And that is that if you're not the source, there's an opportunity to always cite your sources. Who are the individual teachers, the Guru Nam, in your lineage? Where is this coming from? Who are the people who have heard? Who are the people who have heard so that now you can hear? Again, you would cite your sources so that you're not offering something that's merely yours. Your personal perspective as a teacher is so deeply limited and kind of embarrassingly simple. So when you cite your sources, you're including relationship and context and some sense of like being a participant in proven knowledge. Those of you who are practicing Ayurveda, this is the value of a 5,000-year-old system is trial and error has led to the best of the techniques being preserved and offered forward. Whereas presumably the ones that didn't work out so well, the casualties of them have been part of the lineage in their own way. This is also true in our lineage. The people who ran the wrong experiments and suffered injuries or imbalances as a result, we're containing the memories of the wrong experiments within the citation line. And it's not just like academic citations where this is all the 8 million literatures that I'm bringing online for this. When you cite, you're naming the lineage of your own knowledge system, which is not just a huge, broad, endless library, but actually a concatenation of people and relationships. This is also why when in the classroom I can't cite someone, I will say, I came up with this as a way of downgrading what I'm offering, because it hasn't stood the test of time. It's just a perspective that comes from my own heavily limited and still blindered perception. So those of you who are moving into the act of teaching, when you know that you are enough, your presence is simply enough, that you are not on the hook to have all of the knowledge, and certainly not the answers. In a way, your job is to not know, to be continuously surprised by the experience of the person in front of you. I'll quote Dominic, as I always do: leave people space to surprise you. There's a way in which you have this opportunity to still the mind and include your own lineage, and to recognize that it's not on you to understand everything. It's on you to listen behind you and listen to the person in front of you and be a conduit. That's that role. I have 8 million more things to say, but there's somebody walking into the shop, so I'm going to go meet them more soon.